Thank you, sir. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Tillerson, for being willing to consider the nomination which has been put forward to be Secretary of State. I agree with your opening statement that the United States has an important role to play in the world, not just standing up for our interests and values, but also for democracy, for press freedom, for human rights, for rule of law. You were unwilling to agree with Senator Rubio's characterization of Vladimir Putin as a war criminal. And you point out in your statement that Russia has disregarded American interests. I would suggest, as I think has been brought out in later testimony, that it not only has disregarded American interests, but international norms and humanitarian interests. The State Department has described Russia as having an authoritarian political system dominated by President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Freedom House currently puts Russia in a category of countries like Iran, with very restricted political rights, ruled by one part or military dictatorships, religious hierarchies, or autocrats. Do you agree with that characterization of Russia and Vladimir Putin?
I would have no reason to take exception.
Senator Rubio and Senator Cardin both talked about some of those people who have been victims of the Putin authoritarian regime in Russia. And behind me is a poster with a recent New York Times story. I quote, "More of Kremlin's opponents are ending up dead." I'd like to ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to enter the article into the record.
Without exception. Objection.
I think a picture is always worth 1,000 words, and when you put a face to Sergei Magnitsky, as this poster does, and see two other victims of the authoritarian regime in Russia, I think it speaks to what's happening there and how we should think about the country and dealing with President Putin. So I understand what Senator Nunn said, and former Senator Nunn and Secretary Gates said when they talked about the need to have dialogue with Russia and to continue a mill-to-mill relationship. But I also think it's important for us to understand who we're dealing with. In 2008, you notably said that there's no respect for the rule of law in Russia today. Do you think that continues to be true?
That is still the case, yes.
So I think you can probably understand, Mr. Tillerson, why some of us are very concerned about the President-elect's statements praising Vladimir Putin's leadership, his intelligence, including after being reminded of his ruthless persecution of political enemies, and after receiving compelling information that Russia has interfered with our elections. So do you think now is the right time to lift sanctions against Russia?
I think it's important that we keep the status quo until we are able to develop what our approach is going to be. That it will be all part of the approach. That is part of the incentives on the one hand, or part of the greater pressure on the other that will be an important element of developing that approach of that first conversation with Russia. If confirmed, that is the foreign policy step that I will be working through other interagencies, again informed in the National Security Council with classified information, as well as being informed by the views of others to develop that strategic approach to engagement with Russia. So I would leave things in the status quo so that we are able to convey this can go either way.
Under your leadership, ExxonMobil has invested more than $100 million in its Global Women's Economic Opportunity Initiative, partnering with the U.S. government and foreign governments. As you know, the State Department also places a high priority on global women's empowerment, on gender equity, on combating violence against women. I was very disturbed when there was a request from the Trump transition team to find out who the employees within the State Department have been who have worked on gender equity programs, and while I know that has been walked back by that transition team, I still think it sends a chilling message to people in the State Department and to people concerned about efforts to empower women around the globe. So can I ask whether you agree that we should continue that initiative to empower women, and what steps you would take to ensure that the State Department and USAID continue to fund necessary programs to address global women's issues?
Well, Senator, this is an issue that's long been important to me personally as well. I have seen firsthand the impact of empowering women, particularly empowering women's participation in economic activities in the lesser developed part of the world. I know this is a really important area to you, and we talked about it in your office, and there is study after study to confirm that when you empower women in these developing parts of the world, you change the future of the country because you change the cycle within that family, whether that woman has daughters or sons. When you empower the woman and they see them participating at an economic level, it changes the way they will view things as they grow. I've seen specific examples and visited projects in Papua New Guinea, which allowed women to participate by forming a coalition of bread bakers. It takes very little money. Now, these are women that want the opportunity. What they need is the wherewithal and some structure to guide them around how to conduct a small business. Interesting in that example, when the women began to be successful selling their bread in villages all up and down the trails in the jungle, their next concern when they came to our folks was, we've got all this money and we're having to hide it all over the place and we're worried somebody's going to steal it. What do we do? They were introduced to banking, and they were assisted with opening a bank account in the capital of Port Moresby. This is just an example, though, of think about someone who starts with nothing, doesn't even know what a bank is, and all of a sudden now they have a bank account. So that will change their children, and it will change the cycle within that area. So these are extraordinarily powerful programs.
I certainly agree with that. And does that mean you will commit to continuing those programs if you're confirmed as Secretary of State? Yes,
ma'am. I think it's an important part of all of our foreign aid assistance efforts, whether it's through USAID or whether it's through other opportunities we have in more structured ways.
Thank you. Under your leadership in 2012, ExxonMobil's foundation also helped develop a roadmap for promoting women's economic empowerment that specifically cited access to family planning and reproductive health services as a means to improve productivity and earning potential for women. You and I also served, as we discussed, in 2010 on the Center for Strategic and International Studies Commission on Smart Global Health Policy, which also advocated for expanded access to family planning services. Will you pledge to continue to prioritize quality family planning and reproductive health services for women worldwide and ensure that resources and access to these programs are not conflated with support for abortion?
Well, Senator, there are statutory requirements in place around the foreign aid. They're well known, I know, to yourself and myself as well. As I understand it, we currently invest a little bit or something around $500 million a year in programs directed at family planning through foreign assistance. And I think that's an important level of support.
So do I take that as a yes?
Well, I would want to, if confirmed, and I have the opportunity to examine all of the aspects of that program, I just am aware that we do spend about $500 million now.
Well, as you know, if the approximately 225 million women worldwide with unmet family planning needs had access to modern methods of contraception, we would see 52 million fewer unintended pregnancies, resulting in 600,000 fewer stillbirths, 6 million fewer miscarriages, and 15 million fewer unsafe abortions. So I would attest that this is not only a humanitarian value that we should support, but also an economic one. And I'm almost out of time, but I just want to go back to Russia for a brief moment, because as you talk about the potential to work with them, one of those areas that we've been successful on is the New START Treaty back in 2010, which this committee supported and the Senate supported, which ensures that Russians have to reduce their nuclear warheads and delivery vehicles. and it's given us more access to on-site inspections. Do you believe that continuing to support those efforts is important for us?
Yes, Senator. I think, again, this is an area where we have to stay engaged with Russia and hold them accountable to commitments made under the New START, and also ensure that we are in a position to meet our accountability as well.
Thank you.